Hi, welcome today. We're going to be doing another kitchen sessions talk. So thanks very much to everybody for dropping in today. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you all. As you can see today, I'm not actually in my kitchen. I'm in my, well, not my study, it's my dining room. And that's because of logistical difficulties. But hopefully, I've got plenty of books on the shelves to keep you entertained if you drift in and out of the talk today. So thanks again for joining us. My name's Katherine Wilson. I'm a senior lecturer in medieval history at the University of Chester. I specialise in the later Middle Ages. So the later Middle Ages is the period 1300 to 1500, and I specialise in European history in that period. I've been here at Chester since 2012. I really enjoy teaching and researching here. And if any of you are watching and you're thinking about coming and studying history at Chester, then one of the strengths of studying at Chester is that you'll get to study history right through from the fall of Rome, so that's AD 400, right through to the present day. Today, we're going to talk about the hidden narratives of medieval art, because one of the things about when you come to do history at university is that you get to discover a whole range of topics that you've never studied before. So I'll give you this lecture for the next 15 minutes or so, and after the lecture, feel free to type in the chat any questions that you might want to ask me about the subject of the talk. So anything that pops into your head as I'm talking, feel free to ask a question about that. And feel free to also, just if you want to talk about or ask a question about studying history at Chester, you can do that as well. So I'm going to begin our talk today on the hidden narratives of medieval art with two objects of art from the Middle Ages to think about the hidden narratives behind those objects. So the first object that I'm going to hold up, probably badly, so bear with me, shows this object here, shows two figures dressed in the height of 15th century fashion. This object is the Arnolfini portrait. It's painted around 1434. It hangs in the National Gallery in London. The individuals are thought to represent Giovanni Arnolfini, who was a supplier to the court of Burgundy, and his wife, who remains unidentified, in their residence in the city of Bruges. This painting here that I'm holding up is recognised as one of the finest medieval art products. Jan van Eyck was a master, the painter was a master of realism and perspective. The painter, Jan van Eyck, signed the painting here, and we can speculate there's two figures in the mirror in the back there. He might have been represented there as well. The second object that I'm going to hold up, hopefully not too badly, I'll try and not get the glare on, is in the Château d'Angers, Château d'Angers in France, which exhibits the Apocalypse Tapestry series. These tapestries here were commissioned by Louis I, Duke of Anjou, between 1377 and 1382. They were commissioned by a man called Nicolas Bataille, who was a Parisian tapestry supplier. As you can see here, we've got shadowy figures at the bottom. These are the people that are standing in front of them and viewing them. And you can get a sense from this picture here of the sheer scale of these textile hangings, how in fact they're really quite overwhelming in their size and scale. In total, they measure 144 square meters. So if we want to think about how we might examine these objects or interrogate them, in the 19th century, scholars classified paintings like the Arnolfini portrait as fine art. Paintings like these were coveted on the art market, they were gazed at and wondered upon, and academics argued over their various mysteries and symbolisms. Now, in contrast to paintings, which were called fine art by 19th century scholars, tapestries got classified as decorative art, not as good as the fine art. Because of these 19th century distinctions, then, we now are likely to revere paintings more than we do textiles. But there's a problem in this, because the historical evidence from the Middle Ages tells us that people coveted textiles, tapestries, more than they did paintings. These were the things that people really wanted to own. In addition, to many modern viewers, the Arnolfini portrait, the Apocalypse Tapestry series, belong only to an elite class of consumers in the Middle Ages. We might describe the Arnolfini paintings as a projection of the couple's status and wealth. We might present noble owners of tapestry series like that Apocalypse Tapestry series as being an artistic competition with each other. We might describe textile commissions of this size and scale as making propaganda statements about medieval rule or rulership, so about the medieval ruler that owned them. But we think that maybe now that our analyses of these art objects shouldn't just focus on elites. If we do that, then we tend to obscure individuals whose labour was crucial to their creation and who also created demand for these products. So today we'll think about giving a voice and a place to those people behind the medieval art, if you like, and we'll find out that medieval art also conveyed the uncertainty of everyday life and the fragility of medieval rulership. So a first kind of misconception about medieval art or medieval painting and tapestry is that one male master artist produced them. But in the 14th and the 15th centuries, the conception of the artist differed from the one that we have today. In fact, the conception of the artist didn't really exist then. And research has also underlined that the notion of a male master artist alone at work in his workshop on a commission is an incorrect way to view the production of these art items in the Middle Ages, or the majority of them indeed. So, in fact, medieval paintings, large textiles, were produced by the collaboration and the competition of multiple individuals across geographic and linguistic boundaries. If we think about the way that paintings were created in the Middle Ages, merchants had to engage in the trade in raw materials that might come from Asia and Egypt through to northern Italy for pigments, for the paintings, and multiple people might be involved in the painting and in the finishing of them. To produce high quality textiles, it was even more of a collaborative process. You might have to get your gold and silver from Cyprus to wrap around the threads to give the textiles luminosity and sheen. You might have to source silk threads from Italy or China. Multiple people were then involved in their production. You'd have carders and dyers in England, Scotland and Spain, who maybe disentangled, cleaned the wool, dyed the wool. Then you'd have that wool imported to teams of weavers, because teams of weavers it took to produce these big textile commissions, then operating multiple looms. Finally, you'd have people called finishers, fullers, liners, and hangers, completing, cleaning, lining, and edging these textiles. So the production of art in the Middle Ages can show to us a more global Middle Ages, which had multiple trade networks and multiple people involved. In addition, the production of medieval art often involves workers that don't first jump to our minds. Women in particular often disappear from view in the accounts of medieval art. I'll talk about the female figure in the Arnolfini portrait towards the end. But we do find examples of women's silk guilds operating in 13th century Cologne, Paris, and Rouen. Individual women also operated as merchants themselves, sometimes after the death of their husbands and fathers, but sometimes also in their own right. And in the 15th century, we find female suppliers of art to the Burgundian court. So women's historical contribution to medieval art deserves our recognition. Complex pieces of medieval art, such as large-scale tapestries and paintings, also created personal or financial risk for the merchants who undertook to commission them. Clients, especially noble and royal clients, were really bad at paying and settling their debts. So if you were producing a big tapestry set, collaboration made sense to spread the risk. And we have surviving payments for these art objects, like the tapestries, which are spread between different groups of people to spread that financial risk between them of the production of these items. So if production of these items was risky, why bother undertaking it? Well, in a sense, medieval merchants, both male and female, were exploiting wealthy customers to create their own economic security net. If we think for a moment about medieval courts, we can think of them, in fact, as commercial networks where you have a mass of wealthy customers there who have money to burn and reputation to bestow. So medieval courts presented commercial opportunities for suppliers of medieval art. Supplying nobility within a courtly network with good quality products was a means by which a supplier of art might then enhance their reputation. I supply the court of so-and-so. They could then take that reputation back to the urban centres that they lived in, which in turn might lead to more art commissions and further economic security for these individuals. So individuals who kept up the quality of their art products established the right to supply art to certain medieval courts. Jan van Eyck, our painter of the Arnolfini portrait, was given an official position at the court of Burgundy, and he was even sent on diplomatic visits by the Burgundian court. What then of users of medieval art? Why did they purchase and commission these objects? That might seem like a really obvious question, and you're sitting there thinking, that's why she asked that question. Surely people commissioned, used these objects to project their power, wealth, and authority. Well, yes, of course they did. But we know, of course, that when you buy or purchase an object and you seek to display it, sometimes your motives are more complicated than simply showing off your wealth. So when you look at medieval art today, it's important to think about the more complex narratives that lie behind these objects. First, the Arnolfini portrait, I'm going to try and hold up again without any glare, depicts the uncertainty of everyday life, as well as projecting the power and the success of the Arnolfini family. The portrait is like an advert for commercial success of the family as a supplier to the wealthiest and most powerful court of Europe, the Burgundian court. The textiles, which the family supplied to the Burgundian court, are dominant in the room as furnishings. You can see them there on the bed as a backing and hangings. They're on the chair as a cover, even on the floor. The couple themselves are draped in the finest textiles that are produced in Italy and the Low Countries, silks and woolen broadcloths. You can even see how the female in the portrait is showing off the amount of textiles that she has in her dress by holding it up, showing off that wealth of textiles. Under the window there, we can just glimpse fresh oranges that probably came from Spain, also signal the ability of the family to access global trade markets. So the portrait is a historical document or advert of the family's power and status. But we can also see from the painting the motto of late medieval merchants, that the only thing to rely on in life was the certainty of uncertainty. Scholars have debated the identity of the female in the portrait. Is it a memorial portrait to Constanza Trenta, Arnolfini's first wife, who died, possibly in childbirth? We don't know. This remains a mystery. Whether it's Constanza or a later partner, here we have the first hint of the uncertainty of life. the tragic death of a female and child in spite of the family's commercial success. The second uncertainty comes in the Arnolfini family career. In 1461, at the height of Arnolfini's success, the family defected to the French court, which was becoming the archenemy of the Burgundian court. What prompted this change remains a historical mystery. To finish, I'd just like to tell you about the way that medieval art can show the uncertainty of princely rule. This is about a set of textiles that were paid for by a ruler called John the Fearless, the Duke of Burgundy. He commissioned a set of textiles to commemorate his military victory over a city called Liège in 1408. Sadly, the textiles no longer exist, but historical evidence tells us that the first hangings represented John the Fearless mustering his army against the Liégeois, and then it went through the battle scenes depicting the eventual submission of the city to the Duke. The tapestries were extremely large, about 55 square meters, woven with gold and silver threads. And we might explain these as historians as functioning as propaganda of the Duke about Duke's authority and showing the consequences of challenging ducal rule in this period. But there's another side to these tapestries. When they were commissioned in 1411, John the Fearless was in struggle for the control of the crown of France. The French king, Charles VI, was mentally incapacitated and completely unable to rule. Other members of the French royal family were trying to take away John the Fearless's dominance over the French king, and the political situation in Paris was deteriorating into civil war. So when commissioned, yes, this art might have been intended to represent an ideal past, but it also, because it was commissioned in 1411, it also represented political uncertainty and the instability of medieval rulership. So, as modern historians of these medieval objects, we need to think about all the individuals and narratives involved in their creation, use, and reception, to ask far more carefully, whose Middle Ages do these objects reflect? So, thanks very much for listening to that. If you've got anything that you want to ask in the chat, you can. If that's about the portrait or the tapestries, please feel free to ask a question. Otherwise, just thank you very much for taking the time to join me today. I'm going to answer a question for myself just in case. She's not pregnant, of course. She's simply holding that mass of textiles up to her stomach. So that's always a question I usually get. So I'll just get that one out of the way. You're very welcome. Thank you for listening. Thank you again for sticking with me and bearing with me, holding up pictures to the camera. I know it's decorative art of early medieval. Oh, I think, I don't know. So if I'm thinking about decorative art of early medieval England, are we thinking about textiles and things like that? I think one of the, I don't know so much about the early Middle Ages, but what I would say is that I would be interested in thinking about all the processes that went into perhaps the different elements of textile production, whether that was embroidery. So what threads are they using? Where do they come from? Where are those canvas textiles? Where are those being sourced from? Because I think thinking about all the types, everything that goes into the making of an object can tell us much more about the people involved in the processes. And it can give us, we could sometimes get stuck on, there's a patron who orders an object, and then there's someone who uses that object. But obviously there's multiple people involved in the processes around the making of that object. So I think thinking about the materials that go into the making of these things gives us a sense of, different narratives, if that answers that question badly, I think. So I'd like to see more work on that, and I'd like to do more work on that myself. Oh, illuminated, yes. Yeah, definitely. Yes, very much so. Illuminated manuscripts, stonework. My husband works on Anglo-Saxon stone sculpture. We've had conversations about all these processes that are involved. Who are the stonemasons? How long does it take to process? Where are they transferred to? Who are the sculptors? Illuminated manuscripts, yes, absolutely. I mean, in Bruges in the later Middle Ages, you have a huge production in illuminated manuscripts. And of course, one of the things is the animal skins that goes into it. So there's a huge amount of animals. Don't know how I've gone off on this tangent, who end up being slaughtered and processed for this. So, who are the people who bring those animals in? How are they sourced? All the pigments that go into the painting, the making of that, the processes. I don't know of making the pages for the illuminated manuscripts. Then, of course, they often have their own cases that are jeweled that they're put into. Again, these involve multiple people and multiple processes in them. So if that sort of answers that question. It's a book that I'd like to write on the kind of hidden narratives of medieval art. So maybe one day I'll get on to writing the hidden narratives of all these other things. So the question I have here, what do you think the future of medieval art is? Like museum stock, are they going to regain some more relevance to our modern lives? Well, actually, I'm involved in a project just now that's funded by the Arts and Humanities uh, Research Council. And that's exactly about taking the objects from the museum and making them available to members of the public and in school settings so they're able to be handled. So the things we're focusing on, we're actually working with the Grosvenor Museum in Chester and taking objects such as rings, shoes, keys, tiles, objects of everyday life, and taking them out to schools, taking them out to members of the public so that they too are able to look at them closely. So rather than behind glass or whatever like that, they can actually handle and touch these objects. So hopefully, yes, in that way, and by doing more of these things, then these objects can be of relevance to our everyday lives, especially getting them to school children of all ages and giving them a museum experience in class when they might not be able to get into a museum themselves. Also, there's apparently a poem from the point of view of the calf that I would really like to know that. If you want to email me, if you find out what that is, that would be great, because that's really interesting. I'm really interested also in sources where I was introduced to this by a member academic who'd come to one of our workshops on the mobility of objects, where the object speaks. So that would be having a poem from the point of view of the calf would be really interesting, if a bit probably quite depressing, I would think, as well. Yeah, that's a great question about how closely were these objects specified. Did the artist have much discretion, or was it prescribed by the purchaser? It's a great question. We do have some documentation. So the documents that I work with are medieval accounts, and that often it gives us a glimpse into the conversations that the producers are having with their commissioners. And if it's the medieval court, there's kind of intermediaries that the producers have to meet with, who also then go back to the duke. So there's kind of multiple ways of conversing with the person that wants this object. So I think it's a collaborative process whereby you can see that the merchants or the people that are producing them do have an input, because they obviously can say, well, this is available. Say if it's something that's a bespoke commission, maybe not everything's available that the commissioner wants. Maybe not everything is possible that the commissioner wants. So they can advise on what might be technically possible, what might be able to be sourced at that point in time. And it's through these ducal accounts that I work with that you can see these conversations happening between that. So it's an interesting, it's not, where I say do this. They do have that idea, but there is also, you can see the input from the producers as well. was trying to think of a specific instance if there was anything like that. Oh, did purchasers ever reject the finished object? That's a really interesting question. Now, I'm trying to think of. I actually haven't come across a documented instance. I'm going to have to think about this. This is one of these questions that I'm going to go away from it, and I'm going to think, oh wait, there was an instance of this. No, I have not come across that yet. I'm sure there must have been conversations about things not being quite right. The closest I would come to it is that I see things going back for repair or remaking, which would suggest, so in the accounts, that there maybe has been a conversation about, could you go back and add this in, or could you go back and redo that? So it's 25 past now. If there's any other, maybe one other question, I could take that, and then I'll have to end the stream. But thanks for your questions. They're fantastic. They're really great. Yeah, no, thank you. And I'd just like to say that again, please, if you've got any more queries, don't hesitate to get in contact. I would be more than happy to answer your questions. No, thank you all. Thanks so much for tuning in. It's a sunny afternoon in North Wales, so I appreciate you. If it's, maybe it's not sunny elsewhere, but if it is, I appreciate you taking that time out. Thank you very much. I'll end the stream now. Thank you.